Start today, Daf Memches. Memches Amid Aleph. It's going to be 6 lines down from the wide lines at the end of the line. Amar Rami Bar Chama, Hadar Rav Chisda, Rabba Machlekes Reb Elazar Reb Yeshua. Reb Elazar Sever Min Hayel, Reb Yeshua Sever Leim Min Hayel. Let me explain what's happening. That Machlekes in the Mishnah. Machlekes was, how do you separate challah that's tameh and it's about to become chametz? The dough got tummy, and it's Pesach, so you have a problem here. You're not allowed to burn kachim on Yom Tov. You're only allowed to bake if it's something that you can eat. Here you can't eat it. So what are you going to do? So Rabbi Elazar gave us an option of first baking everything and then making it challah later. Rabbi Yeshua says, oh, don't worry about it. Separate the challah, and it's going to become chametz. Don't worry about that chametz because it's not yours. That's what we learned in the Mishnah. Now, the first suggestion of what was the machlekes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua question was, do you own that chametz? Do you own that challah? It has to do with tevas hanah. The fact that you're able to give it to any kayan that you want, that has a certain value. Rabbi Elazar was concerned about that, and therefore he said, don't make it challah yet because there's going to be a violation if it becomes chametz, even though it's not yours, but it still is yours because of that tevas hanah. That was the first suggestion. Then the Gemara says, actually, the machlekes was regarding if we say hayel. Now, the hayel that we said before was hayel v'ibai mitchalallah. Maybe it's really considered yours because you can go to a chacham and be mater neder and take it back. And since you could get it back, Rabbi Elazar considered it yours. So he was concerned about the Isser Chametz on Pesach. So he said, make it first before you make it into challah. If you make it into challah, it's still going to be a violation for you. And Rabbi Yeshua said, because of the hayel, because you're still attached to it, you can still pull it back. At least that's the way we learned from that. Okay. Then we started to get into another discussion. Do we say hayel on Yom Tov? See, the hayel that we said before was, is it considered yours, hayel that you could ask a Rav to be mater neder and get it back? And we said hayel on Yom Tov, hayel that maybe guests are going to come, so therefore you're allowed to cook anything on Yom Tov even if you don't need it. So that's those types of hayel. Okay, now, Rami Bar Chama's suggestion is like this. Go back to the machlekes between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yeshua. What do you do with this challah that's tameh and it's about to become chametz? So Rabbi Elazar says that you bake it without calling it challah. What's the reason for Rabbi Elazar? So we were learning the whole time that the reason for Rabbi Elazar had to do with chametz. I don't want it. The machlekes was a machlekes about chametz. Rabbi Yeshua says it's not your chametz. Rabbi Elazar says it is your chametz. Rami Bar Chama is suggesting that it doesn't have to do with chametz. That's the machlekes. The machlekes has to do with hilchos Yom Tov. Rabbi Elazar says that I'm allowed to bake it, even though there's an item over here that I'm not going to be able to eat. There's one item that one of these challahs I'm not going to be able to eat. Right? I'm allowed to bake it anyway because of hayel. Hayel that I'm able to no, because I'll never be able to get out of that. I'll always need to separate some challah here. But he says like this, hayel that all of the loaves that I'm making, I could actually eat all of those loaves. Every single loaf I could eat. So what's the pshat? One of them needs to be challah. So no, I could remove a little bit of each challah. That means each loaf that I'm putting in the oven, I could actually eat. Now, I'm not actually going to do that. I'm not going to separate one of each challah. I want my challah, so I'll give one. I'm not going to cut each one, a slice off of each one. So, but hayel that it's potentially I could do that, therefore I'm allowed to bake it. Rabbi Shua says, you don't say hayel. We know you're not taking a challah with a pinch off each one, so therefore you're not allowed to bake it. I don't say hayel. So now, instead of the machlekes being a machlekes regarding is it chametz, is it yours, is it not yours, tevas hanah, or are you still attached to it because you can get it back, hayel of Isser Yom Tov, where Rabbi Yeshua's machmer on Yom Tov, so therefore he says don't bake it. And Rebbe Lezer is makel on Yom Tov, and he says go ahead, bake it, don't worry. I know one of them is not really going to be eaten, but hoyel that you could do a trick, the whatever. Okay, that's the suggestion of Rami Bar Chama. This hoyel, yeah. Yeah. You're asking why am I making a big deal about this? We kept. So one more time, we always learned the machlekes between Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua regarding the Isser Chametz. And yes, we were discussing, do we say Hayel on Yom Tov? But that was, we went off with the machlekes Rabbah and Rav Chizda, where Rabbah says that if someone cooks on Yom Tov, from Yom Tov to Chol, Rabbah says that he doesn't get malchus. Why? He says because we say maybe guests are going to come, and it was acceptable for you to cook. And Rav Chizda says, no, you do get malchus, because we don't say that maybe guests are going to come. We know that it's not for you. We know that that you don't need it, and you cooked just for chol, like sasa kal malachi. You're not allowed to do work like that, so you do get malchus. So there's a machlekes Rabbah and Rav Chizda regarding Yom Tov. Now we say that the machlekes Rebbe Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua is actually a machlekes, the same machlekes Rabbah and Rav Chizda. Who would hold like who? Rabbah that says you don't get malchus. He says you say Hayel is the opinion of Rebbe Lezer that says you just bake the matzah, the challah. That's and Rabbi Yeshua that says that that you don't bake it, you call it challah and just let it become chametz. That's the opinion of Rav Chizda. That's very strict on Yom Tov. He doesn't say Hayel. Okay. Amar of Papa. Papa says it's not necessarily lined up like that. You see, Rami Bar Chama suggested that Rabbah goes like Rabbi Eliezer, and therefore, if I want to know what's Rabbi Eliezer's opinion about Yom Tov, I have the answer. He holds that Amrin and Hayel. And as I know Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, if I want to know Rabbi Yeshua's opinion about Yom Tov, I know he says Lo Amrin and Hayel. Hayel's exactly like Rav Chizda. Rav Papa says maybe it's not so. Maybe it's not lined up perfectly the way you're saying it. Dilma Adkan like Rabbi Lezer Hasam Amrin and Hayel. Maybe Rebbe Lezer only says, in other words, what Rav Papa is saying is, you're correct in your explanation of the machlekes Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yeshua, that it has to do with Yom Tov. But maybe it's not really a machlekes about Hayel that would match up perfectly with Rabbi and Rav Chizda. Maybe Rebbe Lezer says that we say Hayel ela beidna de ka'ayel tanura kol choda v'choda chazi le'ledidei. Over here, when I'm putting these loaves into the oven, one of them is challah. Every single loaf I'm able to eat. Hayel, because I can take challah off a pinch of each one of them. Aval hacha, but when it comes to Yom Tov, and I'm cooking on Yom Tov, and I don't need it, the la'archen ha'dechazi, because I already ate. It's not for me. Maybe guessing.
When you say cooking on, you mean baking, right?
Baking, cooking. Sorry.
And baking like B-A-K-I-N-G, not B-A-C-O-N.
Okay. So over there, it's fit for archen. Avram Nosson says you have to be here to make comment. He didn't actually say that, but so. So maybe Rebbe Lezer just says Hayel only if it's fit for you, not if it's. He doesn't hold of the Hayel that Rabbah holds of that it's fit for guests. Where do you get it from? That maybe guests will show up. Therefore, you're allowed to do any cooking on Yom Tov. He doesn't say that. Only if it's fit to you. Yeah, Reb Naftali.
Ask Chaim if I'm allowed. Ask Cohen if I'm allowed to ask a question.
Yeah. You see, exempt.
Thank you. Listen, I'm confused because I think I'm deficient in my knowledge of taking challah. Do we not have takana from the Rabbanim that challah must be taken before the baking, or can you take it any time? before or after baking.
On the next page, when we turn the page, there's going to be a machlekes about that. One opinion says that you have to take it while it's dough. However, there is a lenient opinion that says that you can take it after it's baked. And then in that itself, what if it's not connected? So you have to put it in a basket. You put it in a basket, they're supposed to be all touching. And those are lenient opinions.
So the opinion that we have, Lefi Halakha today, is it must be taken before baking?
That's lechatchila. Afterwards, it could be taken afterwards also. Let me ask you, let's say you forgot to take challah, what do you do?
Well, that's what I'm thinking, because
so you separate a loaf. You separate a small
life would be a lot easier if you can take it after you bake everything. A Jewish woman doesn't have to smell up her kitchen burning challah.
Right. So the lechatchila you have to take before. And if you forgot, you take after.
Okay, thank you.
Now, we're going to learn at the end what happens if you forgot and it's Shabbos. Yeah, the last halachas in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Challah. What happens? He said makes a difference if it's Chutz La'aretz or it's Israel. Challah Chutz La'aretz is more lenient. Then says the big deal is what happens if you forget to take challah and it's Erev Pesach. You see, there's a solution on a regular Shabbos. The solution is you separate a loaf for challah and you burn it after Shabbos, something. That's what you do on Shabbos. If it's challah chutz la'aretz. What happens if you forgot to take challah and it's on Shabbos? In other words, on Friday, they forgot to separate challah on Shabbos. And that Shabbos is Erev Pesach, Shalias the Shabbos. It's a huge problem. It's what can you do? You separate a loaf? What do? You can't, you burn it tonight? You can't, it's going to be chametz. You can't do that. So that's the huge issue. That's actually what we're dealing with. Yeah, that's mamish this case, except they're doing it on Pesach, right? Or it's the same thing. It's Erev Pesach or on Pesach. I have something that's about to become chametz, or an Isser chametz, and what's my solution? I can't burn it now. I can't destroy it now. It's Shabbos. Over there, it's Yom Tov. I can't burn it on Yom Tov. It's the same story. The same problem. So they said, the Chachamim said, take challah before. Don't and don't make it tummy. Here we're dealing with tumah. That makes another issue. Okay. So how do you know that Rabbi Eliezer actually holds like Rabbah entirely, that you say Hayel? Maybe he doesn't say Hayel that guests are going to come. He only says over here Hayel that maybe you can do it in a different way where you don't need to actually separate an entire loaf. It was fit for you yourself, as opposed to what Rabbah was saying that it's fit for guests. Amar Rav Shisha Breder Avidi v'dil malai. Maybe it's not accurate for a different reason. That Ad kan lekam Rabbi Yeshua has some blame in Hayel. Even Rabbi Yeshua really doesn't say that you don't say Hayel. He doesn't say that you don't say Hayel. Ella, when does he say that you don't say Hayel? Ella de ikachada b'lechazi leil de v'leil. That's only in our case, because in our case, by the challah, you can't eat it and guests can't eat it. No one can eat it. So that's why we're saying you don't say Hayel. In other words, maybe Rabbi Yeshua doesn't accept that the Hayel of taking off a pinch of each loaf, but he accepts Hayel of guests. Maybe guests are going to come. And therefore, the lining up of Rabbi Eliezer together with Rabbah and Rabbi Yeshua together with Rav Chizda is not accurate, because really Rabbi Eliezer could hold like Rav Chizda, and really Rabbi Yeshua can hold like Rabbah in an actual case of a regular case of Yom Tov. Amrur Rabbanan Kameda Rabbi Yirmiyah for Rabbi Zera. The rabbi said this over in front of Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Zera. I would believe this is in Eretz Yisrael. They both went to Eretz Yisrael. It could be before, also could be before they left. Rabbi Yirmiyah Kibla Rabbi Zera le Kibla. Rabbi Yirmiyah accepted the pshat of Rami Bar Chama. Rabbi Zera doesn't accept it. Amali Rabbi Yirmiyah la Rabbi Zera. Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zera, Milsa the Kashalan. Rabbi Yirmiyah was a Talmud of Reb Zeir. Milsa the Kashalan V'Asya Kamashani. The Mai Pligi Rabbi Lezer Rabbi Yeshua. We had a question for years. What is the essence of the Machlekes Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua? Hashtam Ruah Mishmei the Gavra Rabba. Now it was said over in the name of a great person, Rami Bar Chama. You don't want to accept the pshat. It's a beautiful pshat. The Machlekes Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua is Machlekes Rabba and Rav Chizda. We always were wondering about this. Amalei, Reb Zeir responds to Reb Zeir, Hechia Kabli, how could I accept this pshat? It's interesting. Rami Bar Chama is a son-in-law of Rav Chizda. He's explaining his father-in-law and Rabbah, their machlekes is really a machlekes earlier. There's really a machlekes between his explanation of Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua. Now, a lot of times that's a problem. Usually we say, Lema Ketanai, let's say it's machlekes. Now, since it's possible to explain, I think this is the pshat, I didn't say this, but since it's possible to explain the machlekes Rabbi Lezer and Rabbi Yeshua differently, as we did in the last plot and a half, so it's not really a question, Lema Ketanai. Why are they arguing now when they could have said that I hold like Rabbi Lezer? Because there's ways of getting out of saying Rabbi Lezer. So they can argue independently of Rabbi Lezer. But now when we look back, we can say that that's the machlekes as well. However, Reb Zeir is saying that how can I accept it? The Tanina was taught in a Mishnah. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua. Usually Tanina is a Mishnah. I don't remember this in the Mishnah. The conversation in the Mishnah was slightly different. I guess it's a brisa. Amalei Rabbi Yeshua, Dvarecha, according to your words, according to you cooking on Yom Tov. Vishasikli, and Rabbi Lezer doesn't respond. Rabbi Yeshua says, don't bake the challah. Just leave it and let it become chametz, and it's not yours. Don't worry about it. Rabbi Lezer says, no, bake it right away, and before you even call it challah. Rabbi Yeshua says to him, based on this brisa, he says, how could you bake it? You're violating leisasa kol malacha. It's not for you. It's not. No one's going to eat it. And if Rami Bar Chama is correct, leimalei, let Rabbi Lezer respond. Time of the mishum hayel. I have a teretz hayel. You don't see Rabbi Lezer responding. The fact that he doesn't respond means that he doesn't have an answer. It's obviously not hayel. He could have. That's his easy answer, and he didn't say anything. So the not saying anything tells me that that's not the pshat. Amalei, Rabbi Yirmiyah says. Yeah. We'll see it here. Amalei, Rabbi Yirmiyah says to Rabbi Zeir, according to you, Hadatanina bebraisa. This that it was taught in a brisa. Amalei Rabbi Lezer, Lidvarecha harei oiver mishum bal yira bal yimatzei. This is actually what we learned in the Mishnah. No, Rabbi Lezer doesn't say it. Rabbi Yeshua has this in the Mishnah. There's another brisa that says, Rabbi Lezer tells to Rabbi Yeshua, according to you, you have to follow this logic. Just it's an extra step than Reb Zeir's claim. Reb Yirmiyah's claim has one more step to it. According to you, Rabbi Eliezer says to Rabbi Yeshua, you're violating Bal Yira Bal Yimatzeh. You're leaving it and it's turning into chametz. That's a violation. V'shastiklei, and Rabbi Yeshua doesn't respond. Now in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yeshua responds, but in the Brisa, there's no response. Hachinami d'lei hadalei. You want to say that Rabbi Yeshua didn't actually respond? In our Mishnah, he does respond. In our Mishnah, it says, Rabbi Yeshua responds that I don't care that it's turning into chametz because this is not a problem for the owner because it's not his. This is not what the pasuk is referring to when it says, Bal Yira Bal Yimatzeh, you shouldn't own it because this belongs to Hektish and it's not a problem. Rabbi Yirmiyah is continuing. Rather, the Brisa doesn't say his response, but in the Mishnah, there is a response. So, Hachanami, so too, maybe the fact that there's no response from Rabbi Eliezer when Rabbi Shua tells him that you're violating the laws of Yom Tov, when Rabbi Shua tells Rabbi Eliezer, there's no response from Rabbi Eliezer, that you're violating Klesasa Kal Malacha when you're baking it, the fact that there's no response there, and there could have been a response of, no, it's no problem because of Hayal, I'm allowed to bake. Maybe I'm gonna take the challah differently, and each loaf I'm gonna be able to. The fact that he doesn't respond doesn't mean that he didn't respond. That just means that this brisa doesn't contain the response. As we see in another brisa, Rabbi Yeshua doesn't respond, but in the Mishnah we see the response. So maybe the fact that Rabbi Eliezer didn't respond is just that brisa didn't have the response, but there's some mechilta achriti, there's some other mechilta where there is a response. I saw that the word mechilta, the chaf and the gimel are interchangeable, and it's really megilta. Now, it doesn't mean that you actually read it, you pronounce it like that. But we find in the Torah also, leiselech rachel, and the Gemara tells us, leiselech ragil. A ragil is a tattletale, someone that's gossiping. The gimel and the chaf are interchangeable. We had it even in this week's parsha. Rashi brings, I forget what it is. We had an exchange. I forget. Rashi tells us somewhere that there's an exchange. Gimel and chaf are interchangeable. Okay. So there's some other brisa that we don't have. Tanya. It was taught in a brisa. Rabbi says halacha Rabbi Eliezer. The halacha is like Rabbi Eliezer. What does that mean? That you bake the challah without calling it challah. You just bake it, and you'll deal with separating the challah later. Rabbi Yitzchak Amar halacha k'men b'seir. Rabbi Yitzchak says halacha like ben b'seir. Ben b'seir didn't get a lot of discussion. He just says you just keep putting it into cold water, and until the end of the Yom Tov, and then you'll burn it down. The dough. Keep putting the dough into cold water. So it doesn't run. Rashi over here, I missed out one point. Rashi over here has an issue. He has an issue, has a question, a very, very big question. Rabbi Eliezer probably holds of Shalcha Iataraya Valataraya Shalacherim Shal Hektish. That chametz that doesn't belong to you is not a violation. Rabbi Eliezer probably holds that. Rabbi Yeshua is using that earlier. Rabbi Yeshua used that earlier to say that you can let the challah become chametz, and it's not a problem. And earlier we said that Rabbi Eliezer's concern about that was that you can go to the chacham and take it back, and therefore it's still like it's attached to you, right? So Rashi asks the question. He says, so why by every hektish can't you do that? Which you probably can, according to these opinions. And so how does it fit with the Gemara that says according to Rabbi Eliezer Svara, at least according to that whole Gemara, which that's the way it was. You can go to the chacham and take it back. Every hektish is going to be a violation. So he changes the girsa earlier, and that hoyel before Rashi switches. He does it over here. He didn't mention anything like that before. And over here he says, I have a problem with what we said before. It must be that the girsa is off. Very interesting. Very interesting. You had to learn another page to go back to see that Rashi was wanting to learn that Gemara. They didn't mention anything in that discussion yesterday. Okay. Now we say the Kamashir Isa. If a woman wants to make matzah on Yom Tov, on Pesach, how much dough is she allowed to knead? But she doesn't have to be concerned that dough is going to become chametz. Well, she's going to take challah also. There's an issue here of taking challah as well. But she wants to know, the Gemara is asking, if you make small batches, you'll be able to bake it and knead it and bake it quickly. There's no issue of chametz. But if she's going to make big batches, then there's going to be issues of chametz. So what would be acceptable? Rabbi Yishmael ben Eishel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika Omer Bechitin Kabin B'Sein Shleishes Kabin. Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika, says that it depends. Wheat, you can make 2 kav, and barley 3 kav. Apparently, wheat rises quicker than barley, and so wheat you need smaller batches. Reb Nosson Mishum Rabbi Eliezer Chilaf Advarim. Reb Nosson name of Rabbi Eliezer says that it's actually the opposite. The wheat is the 3 and the barley is the 2. V'hatanya, the problem is we have a brisa that says, back in Rabbi Yishmael ben Eishel Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika's opinion, V'hatanya, the brisa says, Rabbi Yishmael ben Eishel Rabbi Yochanan ben Breika and Rabbi Chitin Shleishes Kabin B'Sein Abba Kabin. Says wheat is 3 kabin. You told me Rabbi Yishmael holds wheat is 2 kabin. And barley, you said, was 3, and now over here it says barley's 4. the rising. Let's say different types of yeast. That would be a good answer. But that's not what we're going to say. We're going to answer like kasha. Depends on the quality of the flour. The lower quality of the grain, you have to grind 3 kav of cheaper grain to get that amount of flour, because after the sifting and all of that, the grain, you're not left with the same amount of flour. So when we're talking about how many kav, we're actually talking about the kernels before you grind it, not the amount of flour. Because after you grind it, what are you left with? How much of this flour can you use? So if it's a cheaper flour, you need 3 kav, a cheaper grain, lesser quality, inferior quality grain. 3 kav would be the measurement, but a higher quality of the grain, 2 kav is already enough that you can use. In other words, basically it's the same amount of flour, it's just the amount of grain that's changing. Amar Rav Papa says, Shema Mina, grain chiti chasichta, michita malaisa, tvei midagrian shari chasichta, misari malaisa. Dilo hasam tilsa v'achariva. Bad wheat is worse than bad barley, because the difference between bad wheat and good wheat is 1/3, but the difference between bad barley and good barley is 1/4, because the bad wheat went from 2 to 3 to get that amount of flour, and the bad barley went from 3 to 4. So bad wheat is worse than
Bad wheat is definitely not worth it.
Yeah, but they discuss if you're going to buy cheap wine, should you buy cheap white wine or cheap red wine? Which one is worse? What do you say, Abnasim? Don't buy either. What's worse in the mashke? It's probably people would tell you. What's the bigger difference, cheap vodka or cheap whiskey? Yeah, okay. Amar Rav. Rav says kava malugna lepischa. Not more than a kav of from the area of Malugna for Pesach. It's a place. In other words, don't need any more than a kav of this place. Otherwise, you won't be able to get protected from becoming chametz. And then he adds in b'chein l'chala. Same thing applies to challah. That when do you have to take challah? A kav malugna is the amount of challah. It says vatanya or vatanan. It's a different measurement. It's 5 lug. It's a little over a kav. No, I'll say. So the Gemara answers, that measurement is actually the same measurement as what you said regarding challah. In other words, that area they used a different measuring. They called it a kav, but it was actually a different size. Rashi goes through the measurements here. Just in short, challah is an omer. That's the amount of grain of mon that they got. Omer lagogailas. Now there's 10 omer in an ephah, a siris ephah. So a tenth of an ephah is an omer. Now each ephah is 3 sa. Okay. Each sa is 6 kav. That means there's 18 kav in an ephah. Now what you do is you turn these 18 kav into quarters. So we're going to look for quarter kavs. How many quarter kavs are there in an ephah? You're going to have, well, it's 18 times 4, 72. So you have 72 quarter kavs. The quarter kav is called the lug. So 72 lug. Now I need a tenth of that. So it's basically 7.2. Over here it says chameshes revoim, 5 lug. Now Rashi goes through and he explains that has to do with they changed some of the measurements from the desert measurements to your Yerushalmi measurements. They upped it a little bit. So it's, what used to be 7.2 is now 5 in a bit. Okay. Let's go the next Gemara. It says, Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef says, Hani Nashi Didan. The women today, Nag Lemefa Kfiza Lepischa. They do 3 lug for Pesach. Now 3 lug is less than what they're able to do. They're able to do 5 or 7 in the old measurements, or 5. Why are they doing less? So there must be more machmer. Amalei Abaya says to Rav Yosef, "My daitach lechumra." Oh, thank you. What is this? They're being machmer. Chumra dasav de kulo. They're being machmer, but they're actually being more lenient. The kamafkale mechala, because now they're exempt from chala. Because the chiyuv of taking chala is only if they take 5 kav, 5 lug, 5 quarters, and they're only doing 3. So they're being machmer on chametz, but they're being mekel on chala. In general, chumrah is worked like this. Every chumrah that the person has, it's a kula somewhere else. That's usually how it works. Depends which chumrah you want to take. Okay? So yeah, out of the yashan, which is a good chumrah to have, to only eat yashan, but how do you do that? You have to sell all the chametz before Pesach, so you're relying on selling chametz and the chametz kamer or whatever. There's so yeah, the Rambam holds that you're supposed to use wine that's kiddush, that's not levushal. So you're going to be machmer like the Rambam. Wine is not levushal, but you're going to have to be mekel on what about the where you bought it and the goyim, So every chumrah has some other kula that's coming along with it. So he's saying you're being machmer over here about Pesach, but you're being lenient about challah. You're avoiding the mitzvah of challah. Amalei the Abdin Rabbi Eliezer, they're going like Rabbi Eliezer, the Tanan or the Tanya. Rabbi Eliezer Mareida v'neisim l'sal mitzvah from challah. What they do is after they've baked it all, they put it into the basket, and then they take challah afterwards. V'amar Rav Yehuda Mishmal halacha Rabbi Eliezer, and Rav Yehuda said name Mishmal that's the halacha. Amalei, so Abaya says to Rav Yosef, v'itmar alam Rabbi Shua ben Levi leishanav al kikar shel Bavel shenoishchuzum mizu. That's only the loaves that they made in Bavel. The way they would do that is when they would put it in the oven, they would be attached, section chalas. So afterwards, when you took it out and you put it down, it was attached, and you could actually separate because it was all one thing. So it wasn't separate items, and you were able to take challah like that. But if it's small rolls that have nothing to do with one another, You can't say that they all combine and now I have a shir challah. So Rabbi Yosef responds, yeah, but they go like Rabbi Chanina. That says even if it's loaves, you're allowed to do that. Why? You put it into a basket and it's all considered combined. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah has a question. Tabla she'imla levazos in mao. Let's say they put it not into a bowl or a container. They put it into a table. Tabla is a tablet. They put it on just a tabletop. And the same way. Yeah. That doesn't have a lip. It doesn't go up. So is it considered combined? Toich keli be'inan va'aleka. Does it need to be within the empty spot of a keli and you don't have it here because it's just a flat surface? It needs to be in the airspace above a keli. And it is in the airspace above a keli. So we don't have an answer to that. That's right. Usually they put it under a cloth. That's what. Okay. Tanya Rabbi Lezer Eimer Asal Mitzarfan. Rabbi Eliezer says that the basket combines it for challah if after it's baked. Rabbi Shua Eimer Taner Mitzarfan, that the oven combines it for challah if they're all baked in the same oven. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Eimer Kikar Shel Babel Shnei Shlusum Mizu Mitzarfes. Only if it's the Babylonian loaves that are all attached, that's what would combine. But if it's actual separate loaves, it doesn't combine. Okay, we have a new Mishnah. Ram Gamliel says, Shalish Nashim, Lashis Ka'achas, V'oifes Betaner Echad Zuachazu. Gamliel says that 3 women can be kneading dough, and each one will independently use the oven. They didn't all have, they have to share the oven. So what they would do is, each one would take a turn using the oven. Yeah, 10 women in one oven. So yeah, the only way that people could relate to this is in apartment buildings where they have to share the washer and dryer. So, but in the olden days, it was sharing the oven also. So they have to share the oven. So what's going to happen is like this: 2 of the women have to wait while the 3rd woman bakes her bread. While they're waiting, it could become chametz. And then the 1 woman has to wait for the 2nd woman to bake her bread. But nevertheless, it's still acceptable according to Rambam Gamliel because they're going to be kneading they're going to be touching the dough and it's going to be acceptable. The Chum say this is possible, but you have to set it up properly. And the way that you set it up is like this. Achas lasha, one is kneading the dough, and at the same time, achas ereches, one is setting it up, making it into to loaves. That means braiding the bread or whatever, designing it. We're discussing making matzah. They would make it into a shape without a picture. Remember that you like to put pictures on it. But they could actually shape it depending on how they wanted to fit it into the oven. It doesn't have to be, it could be that they had to shape it into certain shapes to get it into the oven. And Ba'achaseifen, one of them was baking it, which means the one that was baking it, of course, started earlier. And the one that was making it into the shape started after the one that was baking it already, but before the one that's eating it now. Rabbi Kiva Aimer, Kiva says, not all women have the same strength. Some of them are more, it's going to call it lazy. Some of them work slower. So not all wood gives off the same heat, and not all ovens bake at the same speed. This is the rule. Tapach, if it starts to rise, tiltish b'tzayin, put it in cold water. Okay. Tanarabanan, Tzad Brisa, Lasha, explaining the Chacham's opinion. He mekatefes. She finished kneading, she starts to shape it. And now her friend gets to use that kneading station. Maktefes, the one that was shaping it, he now bakes. and her friend gets to use that area, starts to shape. And now the third one is now going to need.
Each one did each of the jobs, different things.
Yeah. They could have done this like a factory, but they didn't have the Industrial Revolution, so didn't figure out if each one does the same job. Okay. Oife hilasha, the one that bakes, now goes back to start to knead. V'chaverta oife, and her friend that was shaping it now bakes tachtea. V'ashlishis, and the third one that was kneading it the whole time is now maktefis, now shapes. V'chayzeres chalila, and it goes into a circle. Chalila, Rashi tells us, is machav, it goes into a circle. So where I saw that. Chalila lashon machal saviv saviv, a circle, right? The morning was turned into a dance. Machal is a circle, dance. The hara. Okay, Kolzman shaysekes bebatzik enibal dechimatz. As long as they're dealing with the bread, with the dough, it doesn't become chametz. Rabbi Kiva Rabbi Kiva says not all the women are the same. I have to correct that, right? Some of them work faster. No, some of them are lazier. Tanya was studying a brayse. Rabbi Akiva says, Danti l'fnei Rabbi Gamliel. I judged in front of Rabbi Gamliel, which means I commented in front of Rabbi Gamliel. Yilamdeinu Rabbeinu, teach us, our teacher, B'nashim Zrizis or B'nashim Shein Zrizis. When you said that three women can all be kneading at the same time, and then each one is going to take a turn, what were you talking about? Talking about women that work fast or women that don't work fast. Beitzim lachem or beitzim yaveshim. Wood that's going to catch on right away, it's going to burn quickly, or it's going to be wet wood or dry wood. Dry wood would burn quicker. Betana chama, betana tzainin. Is the oven already hot? Is the oven cold? Amali, ein lecha l'Rosh Hashanah chachamim. I only have what the sages said, that they said that you can do this. And zahaklal, but the rule is, tafach, if it starts to rise, then you put it into cold water. In other words, he's saying you could look at it and see what's happening. Okay, we're going to learn now a Mishnah that we mentioned before. It says Sayar Yisara. Sayar is what we called before chametz nuksha. It's not actually chametz yet. It's becoming chametz. So Sayar needs to be burned. But if you eat it, you're exempt, because it's really not chametz. The din that you have to burn it is a din and that you have to burn it, but it doesn't mean that there's lashes or something if you eat it. Siduk, this is another stage of becoming chametz. It's closer to the real chametz. It's over there. That's a different story. Over there, that's already considered real chametz. Ezu seir, what is considered seir? Kikarni chagavim. This opinion here holds that if there's lines, cracks in the dough, because it started to rise a little bit, like the antlers of grasshoppers, the antennas of grasshoppers, so that's sayar, which is a very early stage. Siduk, if it starts to split, the later stage is when there's a crisscross of these antennas, of these lines on the dough. Divri Rabbi Yehuda, that's Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. It's a lenient opinion. Chachamim say, both of them is chayiv karas. Sayar and siduk. Ve'ezu sayar, what is sayar? Anyone whose face anything that's its surface is white, like a person that his hair is standing up because he's in shock, his face turns white. That's what we're looking at.
Excuse me. Could you please put that Mishnah into English words?
Yeah. In the leavening process, there's two stages. There's sayar and siduk. Siduk is leaven, and there's definitely karas there. and Seyar, if someone eats it, and Seyar is before it becomes chametz, and there's no kares. There's only one problem with this Mishnah, which the Gemara is going to discuss, is that the Chachamim say that both of them there's kares. We're going to have to figure that out. That's like a bit of a contradiction. All right? But basically, Seyar is not real chametz and Siduk is. Now, what is the stages of Seyar? What is the stages of Siduk? Like what's the criteria? That's actually a machlekes. The machlekes, as we'll see in the Brisa, will clarify more. Reb Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda said that both of them, both Seyar and Siduk, were already at splitting. There's cracks on the dough. The question is how many cracks? According to Rabbi Yehuda, single cracks that aren't crisscrossed are at the level of Seyar. And if once it's crisscrossed, that's the level of Siduk. And Rabbi Meir is going to tell us that no, any cracks is already Siduk. What is Seyar? That's only if it's white. All right, he has an earlier stage. Let's see. Tana Rabbanan. Seyar is when the surface turned white, like a person whose hair is standing up. Siduk, what is Siduk? The later stage of chametz. Kikani chagavim, like it's the antennas of grasshoppers. Dibra Reb Meir, that's Reb Meir's opinion. So Reb Meir has an opinion of what's the criteria of Seyar and what's the criteria of Siduk. The Chachamim argue with this criteria, and they say Ezer Seyar Kikani chagavim. That's already like the antennas of the grasshoppers, a little thin lines. Siduk is when there's a crisscross of those lines. That's the second stage. This and this, whoever eats it is chayav kares. The Gemara says, 1 second, you can't say that. You just told me the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that Eichla is pater. And now you're telling me chayav kares. The Chachamim here in the Brisa was Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says, Ema, the way we're going to explain this is how we did this before once. The Gemara did this once. It said, Rabbi Meir, when you look at Rabbi Yehuda's opinion of what is the criteria of Seyar, what is the criteria of Siduk, Rabbi Meir would say that both of those are chayav kares. So when we said Zev chayav kares was not Rabbi Yehuda talking, according to Rabbi Yehuda, there's a distinction between them. It was Reb Meir talking regarding Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rava, my time with the Reb Meir. Why is Reb Meir so strict? It says it's a little crack on the top. It's already. It says because he's not saying that those cracks are chametz. He's saying that you don't know what's going on underneath. If it's cracked on top, underneath there's already bubbles and a lot of chametz. What was that? Tip of the iceberg. Okay. Have a good day, everyone. Have a good Shabbat.